Greetings, hi there, this is Clifford Bates, and we're welcome again to our next attempt on our little series on reading Machiavelli's Prince. Today, this session, we are going to be looking at chapter 2 of The Prince, the title on Hereditary Principality. Okay. This follows the introduction for chapter 1. Again, if you go back and listen to that, what we talked about, chapter 1 is kind of where he sets up and outlines the text, what he's going to accomplish in his accounts of the princes. He gives a certain number of choices and opportunities that he gives out there. In other words, he in his account of possible outcomes, he seems to let forth a certain number of outcomes. You know, these are the varieties that are present there, and that now from this outline he's going to now he's going to start his first example. That is, the first example is of hereditary princes. What are hereditary princes? Well, I mean, hereditary princes are those whose blood is the long one. Remember, we said you go back to what we have said in the first class, first lecture. Let me just go do this quickly so I have it. We have this idea of the hereditary princes, of which the bloods of their lords has long time been princely. So therefore, this is what the hereditary princes mean from chapter 1. Okay, now in chapter 2, he begins his discussion by basically saying something. He goes, this is again, hereditary princes. Chapter 2 has basically 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph itself pretty short. It is about 2 sentences. It goes on this way. The first paragraph starts, "I shall omit the discussion talk of republics, because on another occasion I discussed them at length." Now, by this, it's assumed, and everyone thinks this means the discourses. Again, the discourses it's a much bigger book. It has much more. It's named after, called Discourses on the first 10 volumes or books of T.S. Livy, and it's focused on kind of an account of reviewing Livy's famous first 10 chapters of the history of Rome. It's a reflection on it. It's a reflection, and this is basically the first 10 years of Rome is the first 10 volumes of Livy focus on the first 10 decades. It says looks at the question of the early republic, the republic in that sense. So therefore, the theme of talking about that is the republic. Or is it? Because he will speak as much about princes in that book as here. The only difference is the audience. The audience, again, the Prince is written for some with little time, and the Discourses is written for people is dedicated to young men with lots of leisure. So therefore, he says he's discussed them at length. That's even more. He discussed he discussed these things at length. So instead, now you're not getting a discussion of length. He's going to omit the discussion of republics. But does he? Because there is discussions of republics present. In fact, it is the rule of people who are used to being free and governing them free. So, and the discussion of the civic principate, in many ways, here will be a discussion of republics in one sense. But in the second sense, I shall turn only to the principate, and go on weaving according to the order written above, disputing how one is able to govern and maintain these principates. Now, in other words, in chapter 1, he says that there's 13 of these topics. Okay, which are interesting. He says there's going to be 13 of these topics. This is the weaving. In other words, in chapter 1, he gave us 13 topics. D'Alvarez says this, I think D'Alvarez is right here. Now, he is going to weave. And this is Machiavelli. He uses the metaphor of the weaver. Again, there's a famous reference to Plato's account in Statesman. Okay, the example of from Plato's Statesman that deals with weaving. I actually, it would be useful to go look at that, but I looked at it and I said, nah, it's not gonna. It was just too long for what our purpose is here. I mean, the idea of the weaver, that statecraft and weaving. Again, Plato, a character Socrates, in a dialogue in the Statesman at 279, line 279 to 286a. This whole is a very big discussion about the art of weaving and the role of political life and the political actor or statesmanship. And I think Machiavelli's playing on this. I think this is absolutely correct. Machiavelli's playing on this concept of him that he as a statesman and he's weaving, and that the weaving here is a weaving according to the order written above, disputing how one is able to govern and to maintain these principates. So he's trying to look at the question of describing what he's done to the list of the earlier types of principates. Hereditary, new, the two types of new, and the different modes of accomplishing them. Arms of one's own, arms of another. In other words, if you look at this and then through virtue or through or fortune, right? So therefore, there is of this. There's enough like. Well, let's think of this. There's three types. There's and also being free and not being free. So therefore, wholly new and acquired, and the two types of acquiring, either from acquired something that's wholly new and not there, or hereditary princes, something acquired, then something, two types of acquired, right? Those are the previous chapter, we talked about that. So therefore, this is all what he's doing here is kind of weaving a case. And now back to the point here. Now to this chapter, after the first paragraph, he kind of, in many ways, why didn't he talk about this first? No, this is interesting. Why isn't this? Why is paragraph here, and not in the first chapter? I mean, it sounds like it should have been in the first chapter. But for some reason, it is not in the first chapter. This discussion that he's not going to talk about republics. So here, then he goes into the discussion of hereditary principates. After this second paragraph, he goes, "I say then that in maintaining hereditary states, accustomed to the blood of their prince, the difficulties are very minor compared to those which are founded in the new state." Therefore, the founder is a semicolon. In other words, creating new states is going to be difficult compared to the running or inheriting an hereditary prince. In other words, this idea that maintaining hereditary prince, a state that is one of a hereditary prince, and the people are accustomed. States are accustomed to the blood of their prince. The difficulties are very minor compared to new states, right? He said, because it suffices that the hereditary prince not to omit the order of his ancestors. In other words, the orders of his ancestors. That by that Aristotle means, D'Alvarez makes a point out, that is the form of the city, the particular civic order that they had. The form, the regime, or the politas founded in by his ancestors. In other words, as long as he doesn't forget what his what the ancestors did there, He does not omit the order of his ancestors. In other words, the civic order that the ancestors gave, the institutions, the traditions, the political customs, the political culture, these things. As long as he or she, the ruler, is the prince, is staying within the frame of what people expect, there's not a problem, he says. He says, and moreover, with respect to accidents, to wait for the opportune moment to act. In other words, this is it is sufficient for princes to not omit the orders of this, and to just in respect to accidents, wait for the occasion, the opportune moment to act. And here, the line is wait for the opportune moment to act. Literally means the right time. Wait for the time. To wait for the opportune moment to act. This is again repeated as something that he will repeat this line again in the Discourses, Book 1, Chapter 37, where it is used in the first sentence. The hereditary prince would seem to have would have to do more than temporize. He must also know when to act if he is to keep his state. In other words, he has to know when. He has to know not only he should temporize this thing, the state prince should also wait and know when the opportunity arises. He must understand the opportunity. The line here it goes. So I'll just repeat the line. He goes, because it suffices the hereditary prince not to omit the orders of his ancestors, and moreover, with respect to accidents, to wait for the opportune moment to act. In this mold, if such a prince is of ordinary industry, he always maintains himself in his state, unless there is an extraordinary and excessive force which deprives him of it. Notice it. So, if he's what? If he is a prince of ordinary industry. Industry means effort, a skill, his ability. He's an ordinary guy. He's not a complete fuck up. He's not. Ordinary means normal. Ordinary means he's typical of of a king. In other words, he's not a complete fuck up. He's not great, but he's not a complete. He's not an idiot, and he's just what he says. It is of ordinary industry. In other words, he's not lazy. He's not a good for nothing. He's not a ne'er-do-well. He is just ordinary. He's not a super duper character. In other words, he's bog standard in that sense. If he's bog standard, what happens? He'll maintain it, and it will take what? Notice this. It will take, in order to remove him, he always maintains a state, unless there is an extraordinary and excessive force that deprives him of the state, of it. In other words, it has to be two things. It's not one or the other. It has to be, again, extraordinary and excessive force. If he's ordinary, works well, unless a extraordinary and excessive force boots him out. In other words, he's not going to lose it because he just bungles at something. It takes it something extraordinary, and if it's extraordinary, if it doesn't have enough power behind it, it won't even try. It has to have enough force to excessive force. Excessive force. That's important to pay attention to that line. The words here matter. Machiavelli chooses his words carefully. He's crafted this. Every word and every way he's doing this is crafting it so that the meaning, there's a specific meaning and implicit understanding of what's going on here. So what is it? In other words, and what is it? It says, unless there is an extraordinary event that deprives him of it. And deprived of it though he may be, Yet the usurper have some mishap, and he reacquires it. In other words, my God, the thing that took an extraordinary. In other words, it took an extraordinary event and with excessive force to do it. And let's say it does, but then what happens? Just a little. This usurper has just a little mishap, and the old prince, the hereditary prince, or their family returns back, and reacquires it. So that's a wonderful line. It's let the usurper have some mishap, not a disaster, not a bad thing, just some mishap, and he reacquires it. He requires what? He is here is the prince who lost his thing, the usurper who usurped him as a mishap, a mere mishap. And what happens? It requires here. Now he has this line. Now he goes from this general idea. He gives us, in other words, he kind of gave a kind of maxim, a kind of a teaching. And now he gives an example. He goes, we have in Italy, for the example of Duke of Ferrara, who stood up the assaults of the Venetians in 84, and for those of Pope Julius in 10, for no causes other than he was ancient in that dominion. Now the example there is, the notes are here. I'm going to read it. I'm going to go look at the note and book thing. Now, of course, one of the words, it's going to be lots of causes here. He looks at causes. Machiavelli speaks of two dukes of Ferrara as if there were one. In other words, the dukes of Ferrara, he speaks as though there were one. Nicola d'Este of 1431 to 1503, and his son Alfonso d'Este, 1476 to 1530. It should be noted Machiavelli is somewhat inaccurate about historic facts throughout the Prince. In other words, this is one of the things. This is one of the very annoying things. He's playing with the facts. He's doing it for specific reasons. The event to which he alludes are as follow: Venice and the Pope, Sixtus the Fourth, declared a war on Ercola d'Este in 1482, but failed to dislodge him, and peace was concluded in 1487. And in 1510, Pope Julius decided to abandon his alliance with the French, the League of Campri, in which had been erected against Venice, and conclude a separate peace with the Venetians. Alfonso failed to follow him. The French were driven from Italy, and Alfonso was sent into exile by Julius. That is, Alfonso did not quite stand up to Julius. Alfonso was subsequently restored to his duchy by Pope Leo X. Which again, Leo's a Medici prince, okay, the Medici Pope. So now this is talking about the things and the old dominions. This example of that. But now this is another one. This is an interesting line. Now he's the next sentence. He's going to say something that's, pay attention. For the natural prince, there are few causes and less occasions to offend. From whence it follows that he must be more loved, and if extraordinary vices do not make him hated, he is reasonable as they would naturally have goodwill towards him, period. And in the antiquity and continuity of the dominion of the memories and causes for innovation are extinguished, because one change always leaves the toothing for the building of another. Now, that innovations are extinguished, because one change always leaves the toothing for the building of another. Now, let's go through the points here. First of all, natural prince. Natural prince, that's a weird word. He was talking about hereditary princes. He changes the words. He goes from a hereditary prince, natural prince. Now, is the hereditary prince? Now, you can say a hereditary prince is one who's been a prince for a long time. Family's been princely long. Here, this is a natural prince. This is weird. A natural prince is one whose blood or lineage of the people have been accustomed. This is what it seems to be saying. But Machiavelli seems to suggest that the natural prince may be something other. he is one. He is one who is born by fortune a prince, and then is able to take advantage of whatever accident befalls him. This is how D'Alvarez on the note takes it, and I think he's right about that. In that sense, there is this idea that the natural prince is one who's born a prince, someone who has that capacity, and just if an occasion or an accident allows him to do it. Now, here is an interesting. This is the in that sentence. He goes, "Is that weird thing?" He goes, "For a natural prince has fewer causes and less necessity to offend." Right. In other words, he has fewer causes and less necessary to offend. From whence it follows that he must be more loved. And if ordinary vices do not make him hated, it is reasonable, but that they, who's the they? Who's the they? Will have goodwill towards him. And D'Alvarez has this wonderful note about they. They, since Machiavelli is addressing a prince, speaks of the many, simply as they. In other words, he's talking to the prince. Therefore, every time he uses, now this is very interesting, he's putting himself at an equal to the prince. And whereas he's talking to a prince, the prince is that, and therefore the they always implies the many. It is a very unique linguistic trick that Machiavelli is doing. It is kind of a hey prince, they is referring to the many, the popular, and therefore that's why it's a pronoun, and the pronoun, it's a pronoun. There's a joke about pronouns, right? The they here is Machiavelli's, and by his using of that, he's signaling that he's an equal with the prince, at that sense, and that's that line. It's they will have naturally, the people will have naturally goodwill towards him. So as long as he doesn't make his vice, in other words, he doesn't have extraordinary vices to make him hated, it's reasonably bet that they will have goodwill to him. So therefore, he's talking about, it's at one level, the theme of this chapter suggests he's talking about the hereditary prince. Again, it looks like he's talking about the hereditary prince, but it could be something more. We don't know. It just follows. He uses the natural prince. Who is the natural prince? He's the one who's born a prince, right? This is what natural means. By nature, the prince. But the discussion was not the prince by nature, but rather the prince whose blood he was the ancestor. He's born a prince because his father was a prince, and his line inherits the prince, this princely reign, this principality, and therefore, at one level, there's a double meaning here. Is this account really about the hereditary prince, or is this about a prince who is by nature princely? It could be both too, and this is the other thing. This could be what is true about the hereditary prince is also true about the prince who is by nature. But okay, now let us get that line again. The line is, it would have naturally goodwill towards them, period. And in the antiquity, in other words, the ancientness and the continuity of the dominion of the memories, in other words, the memories of his family's rule, the rule of the ancestors, the rule of this, and causes for in other words, the memories and causes for innovation are extinguished. In other words, the continuity of the dominion, the memories and causes for innovations are extinguished, forgotten. In other words, the antiquity and continuity of the dominion, of the family, of the line, it makes us forget about the innovations and the changes that happened in time. Any long-term regime, every king, there's always going to be the beginning of the monarchy, the beginning of the tradition, the family. Any regime will always have an origin story, and that the origin story sometimes is not as pretty or nice. And that's why they often rewrite it to kind of make it nicer, make it sound less bad. Over time, we rewrite our stories in that sense, and what happens here is that over time the character of the rule of the prince and the family will will be that they have goodwill. His vices are not extraordinary, and as long as he maintains the orders of his ancestors, what will happen is they will have goodwill to him, to the prince, the ruler, and therefore, and that goodwill will kind of act like a forgetfulness. It will as long as so the continuity of the domination. Sorry about that. We were about to be interrupted, and I didn't want to. In other words, please forgive the horse in the throat. I think my wife actually brought me a Fanta, just so because I think she heard my voice screeching. I'm doing it on camera. I was doing it before off camera, but I broke the fourth wall. So therefore, the innovations, the causes for innovations, and the memories of innovations are forgotten, extinguished, gone. As long as the memory of that long-term dominion and care of rule. So therefore, what is it? But he says, because one change always leaves the toothing for another building of another. That's a weird line there. The Italian is adolento. My pronunciation is horrible, so you have to forgive that. The toothings is a technical term and denoting bricks or stones left. In other words, this is the toothing. They build things. They have the things like this, and that's why they always have the big holes. And that therefore they would allow it to build the next level. You leave kind of gaps in the stone so that you can now add the next level, doing it someplace else. So therefore, it's a technical building term. That stones left alternatively projection at the end of walls or buildings so that additions may easily be made. So therefore the toothing here is that, in other words, he's making a point about the way things happen because of innovations of time. That we do things, we've acted, and that every time there's a change, every change kind of prepares the way for the next change, the next move on the thing, like the teething. And then he ends on this question that therefore the continuity of the continuity of the rule of this prince, his family and his time offers a kind of self-protecting thing, a protecting thing that allows for the regime to maintain itself. Perpetuate itself. When I say the regime, the type of principality. Again, this is my Aristotelianism, my Aristotelian side coming in, talking about regime when Machiavelli does not use that word. Rather, the principality here is perpetuating itself by its longevity. In the memory, the fact that people recognize that this is this family. This is what we don't understand. We can wonder, if we look at England, will the English people really give the same kind of? Will a democratic people tolerate the next generation after? This weekend. You had the Jubilee, the Platinum Jubilee of Elizabeth. And Elizabeth has been the longing reigning English monarch ever now. No, I think it'll be very, unless, who knows, maybe we'll live longer. I won't see that next month. But I doubt Charles will be king very few years, I suspect. Even if he lives as long as his mother, he will not be king that long. And his reign will be worse than that of his great ancestor Edward the Seventh. Edward the Seventh, the son of Victoria. I think he won't die as due to the disease, due to the cancer that Edward had. But I do not think Charles will have the same success. Now the question is, William, his son, will they've changed the monarchy too much. In other words, we could argue that they have changed it. Even Charles constantly again altering the order. In other words, the regime of the English, the regime has been changing. Elizabeth doesn't necessarily change it, but the regime has changed greatly in her reign. The regime that England is now is nothing like the regime that she inherited. And she really, she was just used as a puppet for all these changes and really did not stop it or try to even, and she didn't really fight one way or the other. The biggest fight I remember is her disagreement with Thatcher over the that was not over England. It was over the Commonwealth. In other words, it wasn't she didn't find anything to stand for within the context of the England, but it was about her role as the head of the Commonwealth. And that was more important for Elizabeth. Now, why am I bringing this again? Elizabeth of England is probably the clearest case of a hereditary monarch. She could have easily been disposed after 1946. We forget how the Attlee in the Room for Change could have after the even though it was the Conservatives came in power right after, and when her father dies, the Conservatives are in charge, and it's Churchill who will guide her in her first years of her queenship. But regardless, what am I giving that discussion for? Because this is the kind of example of what's thinking. That, in other words, Machiavelli would say, "Wait a minute, you've changed." In other words, too much has changed. And what about the ordinary vices? Come on, ordinary vices. That we know too much about Charles, about some of his dirty pillow talk with Camilla, right? Because of the leaks and the sensationalism. The more we know about the royal family, the more we don't like them. Like all celebrities, in that sense. This is the danger of celebrity. I only raise this right now as kind of a point, so before we finish up. Now, there's this idea that the chapter ends on this weird thing about the change and the way change moves, and that all changes prepare the way for future change. That's a very interesting ending here that should get us thinking that all changes prepare the way for the next change, whereas the continuity gets us. In other words, as long as he has no back vices, they won't hate him. Vices that, if he has extraordinary vices that do not make him hated, it is reasonable they will love him and goodwill towards him, right? And then the antiquity and continuity of the dominion. In other words, the antiquity, the fact that this is such an old order, and that this is continuing. This will make people forget the causes of innovations, and the memories of those innovations. People will forget, ironically, they forget how much how much the name of the family, come on, how it was a German name, Saxe-Coburg, come on, it's called Windsor now. And this is, again, George V. George V fundamentally altered and reshaped the monarchy. In many ways, his reshaping of the monarchy does play an important role but this changing is forgotten because of longevity. We are now, because of Elizabeth's long longevity of her reign, we forget how this was the time that how this monarchy in the England changed. It's forgotten. So that's what another aspect of hereditary princes. Hereditary princes leads us to a kind of a forgetfulness, a kind of forgetfulness of themselves, of this order. And as long as and again, this is the problem, that when it takes to remove them, it takes an extraordinary. If they're ordinary and they're simple, they're not great. It takes excessive force to remove them, and it's not excessive force, and it has to extraordinary excessive force. Go ahead, that's imagine. That's just, in other words, as long as the guy is ordinary industry, excessive. Think of that, and then and to regain it, a mere accident. The usurper just only has a mere accident and returns back to the dynasty. So, and you can see that. You can even see that with Cromwell, right? That's the example. After Cromwell died, there was no, and Cromwell's son had no desire to continue, or Cromwell himself or his son had no desire to be king. And what happened was the rest of society wanted the return of the king, so they brought his son. They brought his son back. The restoration, right? The restoration of the Stuart monarchy. That turned out. His brother ends up. He lasts only because he doesn't have any children. He insists that his brother, who has children but all girls, hoping that his brother will follow him, but his brother doesn't have the judgment of him. James will remarry and hope to get another kid, and apparently he had a child. We don't know. And then what happened was this drove the English to remove them, a very extraordinary. And what happened was, who they bring in? They bring in his daughter and her married to the grandfather's an offspring from his grandfather, from not Charles but of James the First, one of the sons and daughters that married the Scottish one. So therefore, you have the same thing. Even though there's a revolution, the revolution that removes James II brings in his own family. Okay, it's still, in other words, it's not there's no real usurpation or change in this sense. So therefore, this is what's so interesting about this hereditary prince in that sense. The big hereditary change in England is the Tudors, right? This is something Starkey's good on. David Starkey's good on. And I would recommend someone like David Starkey to understand the Tudors and how the revolutionary character of this. But the next change, you have to look at this from the point of view. What is this kind of concept of, again, I'm an American. We don't know about monarchy. We had a revolution, and we don't have a monarchy. We have only celebrities, right? Well, on this, we're ending. That's enough for today. And I'm ending this. I'm going to leave this on as it is. I think next time we'll meet, we'll talk about the next chapter, chapter 3 of The Prince. And I hope this has been useful. Again, if you like this, please say some comments. Please, tell me what you like and dislike. Again, I'm just working on this as kind of try by try. If you like it, please like it, subscribe, share. Watch some of the other things I have in this my little this little channel of mine. Have a good day. Bye-bye.